Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, stories, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out the articles, videos, and more at passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, join the community forum, and of course, attend the weekly online Global Passive House Happy Hour. Now, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to another episode of the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh and I'm coming to you from Auckland in New Zealand. Zach, you there?
I am. Hello, I'm coming to you from Seattle.
Awesome. And we've also got Mary and Ilka on the line today again. Great to have you back. Mary, where are you calling from?
Just north of San Francisco here.
And Ilka?
I am in Germantown, Philadelphia.
Germantown, very, very appropriate. Great to have you back on the podcast this week with another great interview, which we're going to get into shortly. But just before we do, let's give a bit of a shout out to some supporters of the Passive House Accelerator, Zach.
Absolutely. So everything we do, including the podcast, comes thanks to support from our sponsors. Our founding sponsors are 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxtingui Architects, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, Glavo Foam Glass Gravel, Minotaur All-in-One HVAC and Dehumidification, RDH Building Science, Rockwool North America, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. Our champion sponsor is SIGA, and our stakeholder partner is NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. So thanks to all of those supporters for underwriting this work.
Awesome. Well, we're going to jump into the interview for this week. But before we do, just a little bit of a backstory. I'm super excited, Ilka, that you got this guest, because most people in the Passive House scene, most listeners will be familiar with one of the projects that we'll be talking about, which is, I think, the world's first Passive House hospital. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So, just you will introduce our guest in the show, Petra, but just give us a quick backstory of how you connected with Petra.
So I connected with her through my old roommate, actually. She studied with me architecture. Her name is Steffi Herkenrath, and she is actually specializing in health in hospitals. So she knew Petra and connected us, and is very curious about this podcast as well.
Awesome. Well, like I said, a lot of people will be familiar or have seen parts of this project. I know it's been written about, and I'm sure it will be written more about as it starts to be in use more. So let's jump into the interview, and we'll be back afterwards to pull out some of the highlights.
Welcome. Herzlich willkommen, Petra Wörner, to our podcast. You are one of the managing directors and partners of WTR, Wörner, Traxler and Richter, a firm with over 160 employees in Frankfurt, Dresden, Munich, and Basel, and that specializes in hospital buildings. But first, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in designing hospitals?
Yes. Well, my background is having grown up in a household where my father was an architect who always designed hospitals. So this kind of building type, I grew up literally, you could say. He usually took me on his journeys and trips to the client and on site when I was already very little, which was very interesting and exciting. Either to be on a big site, construction site, because hospitals are naturally not small buildings, but they are always huge buildings. And then I experienced from time to time the phase when you give a building to the client, when already furniture and all the things are in the building, and you still redo it somehow, but the client already furbishes the building. So when I was little, I already experienced this phase, and I found this so extremely exciting and interesting. So then I grew up also in the office because I helped my father, and I met him there. He was always in the office. So I had the idea, when I went to see my father, I should better go to the office. So I very early learned what I could, or how I could participate also as a non-architect within the process building houses. And then, of course, after I finished school, there was no question that I would study architecture. And when I finished my wandering time, I took almost 10 years off being abroad and studied in Chicago at the IIT, for example. I worked in Manhattan in several offices, and I did really off things like building sculptures for Art on Beat. I don't know, maybe you know this exhibition, which was a kind of really interesting thing during those landfill projects Manhattan went through in the 80s. I came back to Germany and I was thinking, why don't I try to develop this office started with my father in a new generation? And since I always was attracted by this idea, how to build a hospital and how diverse the client is, talking to, of course, also the doctors and the nurses and all those people working in a hospital. And this idea of transferring it in architecture, I found that worthwhile starting to work in this field. So I started becoming an hospital architect, or an architect specialized in hospital buildings, so I would say, because we are doing also a lot of other projects, not in the hospital field.
Mm-hmm. Since you're talking about specialization, your firm designed the Klinikum Frankfurt Höchst, which is the first hospital built to Passive House standard pretty much in the world, which means there wasn't even a standard for hospitals when you started in 2010. How did it even come to the decision to build this as a passive house? We do know that the city of Frankfurt mandates all public buildings to be built as passive house, but a hospital is a pretty large endeavor.
Well, on the first hand, it wasn't a new idea building passive house buildings. Mm-hmm. The only thing was there was never, or even the field of public buildings, it was not that common. And Frankfurt those days had a mayor and a planning department. They announced for the legislative period of their rulership, they said, we would like to build every new public building as a passive house building. Mostly it was school buildings, of course. And our project was, fortunately, the hospital project of the city of Frankfurt. So at those days, it was an invention because there had been never, there was no answer if it is possible to do the planning first and then also the realization, to transfer a hospital in a passive house standard. Because as everyone knows, we have a lot of warmth and heat within such a building. And that's actually the main question, how to get rid of all that heat. So we need a lot of cooling, and cooling needs a lot of energy. And so this is actually exactly the opposite of the idea of a passive house. So we have too much energy actually for this kind of building. But since it was the will of that department, we started working with all the engineers and also with passive house experts those days, which was Professor Feist and his crew. And so we tried to find out how it would be possible to transfer a hospital or to build and plan to and build a hospital in passive house standard, and it worked. I mean, apparently we will get all certifications we need, and so it will work. Yeah.
And how did this change the way your project process to incorporate this requirement to meet the passive house standard?
Well, the main or the most important change is within all the energy demands we usually have to organize within a hospital. It's not the ward area, of course. The ward area is like in a hotel, or you have these units where the patients would get their treatments, and you have these sanitary units. But since in Germany traditionally ward areas are not air conditioned, we would not have a lot of energy demands in those areas. We do have the energy demands in all the diagnosis areas where the huge MRIs or the CT machines are, and all these medical diagnostic devices. And the first question we proposed was, how long would they use those devices? And how much energy, honestly, is really on demand? Because for some reason, everyone thinks diagnostic work is done 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But it is not like that. Because we have running times for these devices from 8 to 2, for example. So you can minimize actually the energy demand in the diagnosis areas. So we reduced 30% almost energy use, which is, I think, quite important, And this is something we did a lot of workshops. We really found out by working step by step, and we try to identify where is energy needed, how much do we have, how can I reduce MEP devices. And so we worked this out step by step during the planning phases. So actually, it's not an invention. We could have done this much earlier. Yeah.
Yeah. So who was part of that of this project team that had these workshops? Was it very early on the Passive House consultant and the Passive House Institute as well?
Of course, mainly also the responsible users of the hospital, because they had to commit themselves to really tell us how much or when they would use those devices, of course. So the client and the Passive House team members, it was not only Professor Feist, he has a huge team. So we had a team circling his people, and then of course the mechanical engineers. They calculated then, and building physics people, because again we do all the building construction to have this somehow spread all over the building to save the energy within the building. So it was actually a huge team of experts, starting at the very beginning to identify all those aspects so we could have at the end this product Passivhaus.
Mm-hmm. Also, you had to find a builder. Or were you responsible for finding a builder that could then implement the design of the Passivhaus, the hospital?
Well, in Germany, it's actually it's our work to describe every little detail that much that you go over the market and ask a builder or Generalunternehmer, general constructor. In that special case, we have a general constructor, a contractor who builds this building, and he takes all our planning and put it together. He would not plan himself. He would not start again and do planning for the building. When we transfer our planning to a contractor, every single detail is solved. So there would not be a problem in transferring that.
So nothing is left to decide on site during the construction.
Yeah. So we somehow simulate the entire building. Maybe this is a good description during planning phases. And so we could be fairly sure that at the end, after having it constructed, the building is functional. Also, in that particular case, it gains its Passivhaus standard certificate. Yeah.
Yeah, and a big target is the airtightness, right? So that's something that is always kind of at the end that can prevent you actually from achieving certification. But you did very, very well with, I think, 0.13 air exchanges. So were you surprised that you did this well, or is that something that's just kind of part of your typical hospital building?
Well, designing and building hospitals is so such a complicated question. At the end, we are still architects, and also would or one of our big issues is also to be sure that there is good architecture and ambience for the patients and also the people who work in that hospital. And so it was not at all a surprise, because we are used to design and build isolated ward stations, for example, ward areas for HIV patients, for example. So we are used doing blower door tests. And this is actually the same procedure here. It's only a different standard, yeah, but the technical basics are the same. And since we have those MEP engineers so very close on our side, it was never a problem.
So in effect, the whole design process didn't deviate so much from what you would have done anyway.
No, not at all. Mm-hmm.
Because you always, the buildings that you design meet a high quality of standard anyway, because
Yes.
what you were saying, you have to provide ventilation anyway. You have to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a good description. Yeah.
And is that true for choices of windows, for example, and like thickness of insulation? You said that you didn't have to worry about keeping the heat in. It was more the other way around. But in terms of windows, did you have to make a different choice than your standard windows, or how did that work?
Yeah, of course, the entire isolation is tighter than on any other building. Also, the windows are three-layer glazing, not only two-layer glazing. But on the other hand, we are able to open the windows. Yeah, it's not a question of not to open a window and keep it completely tight. The only thing is we have to control it, of course. And maybe this is something, the more you try to optimize the energy use, the more you have to control it, of course. Yeah. And because optimization needs controlling, yeah, on the other hand. So maybe this is a good answer for that. But the building itself has to be used like before or after that. Yeah, it's more idea of controlling and saving energy and how you would make it possible in that particular question. Because I already told in other occasions that maybe this would not, maybe we don't build another Passivhaus hospital because the questions are already, how do you say, we are already deal with renewable energy, for example. We have new questions now, hybrid constructions and things like that. We are already a step further than only Passivhaus.
Mm-hmm. But that kind of goes with the Passivhaus standard too, because they have different levels of certification, and the higher levels, they also include renewables. So were renewables also part of this the hospital build?
No, well, not at this particular project.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No. But the new project we are working on at the moment, they question very much the renewable energy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But then, I mean, I guess the first step is really to look at the energy consumption, just how you did for the Passivhaus standard, because then you don't have to generate as much energy. So in some way, even if you don't build towards the standard anymore, it's probably really just cost you to dive deep into the analysis of what kind of energy is being used. I'm just kind of wondering, is that because it's Passivhaus, are these diagnostic equipment, is that different than how you built it before?
No,
it's the same.
No. Mm-hmm. No. The standard is exactly the same. We have 10 operating theaters, and no. There's no difference. Only the question: how long is it in use? Yeah, this is the question. Mm-hmm. Because it's different if you have it 24 hours, 7 days a week in use, or only 6 or 8 hours per day. And on Saturdays and Sundays, it would not be in use. Yeah.
Right. So you just have to be more precise about the usage time so that you could understand how much energy they would require.
Yeah, exactly.
And was there a big cost premium to meet the Passivhaus target?
Well, we found out that it's only actually 3% over a normal standard budget, which I think is not that much. Yeah. But it depends also because on all the technical devices, they are not that big. Yeah. It's not, normally we have 50 by 50 or 60 to 40% cost between MEP and building construction. And since we could reuse the MEP costs because we didn't need so much
heating equipment.
Yeah, for example, we don't need the heating. Actually, we don't need so much electricity, so we could reduce those costs. And we had more on the building construction side because windows are advanced and the isolation is bigger. So at the end, it's only 3% more expensive than a standard hospital, which I think is fine. Yeah.
And then on the other hand, how much energy are you able to actually save
Yeah, 30%.
30%.
Yeah,
that's great. Yeah.
And also, as I understand it, this project is, going to be a leading example for architects in other countries to try and understand how to make a very energy efficient hospital.
At least it's a prototype now, and of course it sets the goal. Yeah, I think it's wonderful actually to went through this process once, and now we can learn and optimize. Yeah.
And sort of going to the more personal aspects of your career, how would you say that being a woman has affected your architecture career? Because you are a leader in your firm, you're a principal in the firm. And was that challenging as a woman to get to that position? Or
I mean, I would say it was very challenging being a mother and an architect and a leader. I mean, this is really something quite challenging. And I would not say that because I'm a woman, my career was slower or I could not reach those aims I was dreaming of or things like that. No, it was a lot of work because I had these multi-professional situation. Yeah. And since I'm a representative, I'm 63 now, so I'm a generation where it was not that common being a woman or a mother in profession. So there was also the entire infrastructure we do have today for all the young people. This wasn't existing those days. It was a kind of adventure. But since I love my profession and I really love to be an architect, I just took my children to my office as I did when my father was never at home. Yeah, it's the same process. But I would not say that since I'm a woman, I had difficulties. No, I would not say this. Mm-mm. Maybe the question is being independent, being self-employed. That made it maybe a little easier because I felt much freer in working at night or being in the home office at those days. I made my own rules dealing with that situation, being also a mother. That would have been more difficult 30 years ago than today.
Yeah.
Society has developed meanwhile, fortunately, I would say. But I decided then to be, I'm self-employed, and that solves the problem. So I think it's always a question of your own ambition, how to work with these problems.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned earlier that you decided to kind of go into your father's firm and just kind of bring a little bit of the kind of next generation into the process. Is that something that you are looking at doing now with the next generation as well?
Yeah. I mean, that was really, or I think this is like even a huge present. Looking back, for such a long time, we are celebrating the 50th anniversary this year, so we can look and somehow analyze building hospitals in 50 years, how it developed and how differently problems were approached. And of course, we are the second generation and try to include a hospital into architectural history for some years, like it was in the 18th and 19th century. We lost after the war. After the war, hospitals were infrastructure and totally function and not very attractive architecturally. Architecturally, and we try to get back into architecture. And the third generation now, I mean, I'm not quite sure what their goal will be, but maybe their goal will be being in architecture, building passive house standard hospitals, and and trying to get this done with the new ambitions within our society, having reduced working time and things like that. Yeah, work-life balance, and I mean, this is really a big issue, especially in an architect's office, as you know that architects usually work all the time. So these are the new questions. Not that much from the design point of view or the technical issues we have to solve. I mean, this is technique, and we are all engineers, and we used to do this. But doing within this field of society and social demands, social demands would be the good word. Yeah, that kind of not hard, but you cannot ignore it.
One more question. I understand that you have 2 children. Are either of them following in your footsteps into your office and becoming architects?
No, no. My children are. They went into natural science. Natural science, you would say. My daughter is 33 now, and she has a PhD in brain research. She's a biologist. And my son is 28 and starts becoming now a surgeon. And so maybe they are somehow influenced because of the building type. But my daughter, when she was little, she said to me, "Mama, I will never become an architect because you have to work so much."
And your children both happen to work in buildings that you designed,
They did.
right?
Yeah, they did. Yeah. Yeah. Once I built the a little research center for the university in Bonn, who tries to find out. It was already a little brain research center with surgeons and psychologists and, of course, medical people. And once she did an apprenticeship there. Yeah. And Luis also works in an operating theater rebuilt at the moment. Yeah, it's funny. I mean, there are so many projects done.
Yeah. Well, difficult not to work in a project that your firm has designed or planned. That's great.
I mean, Germany is not that big like America, so it's not that much of an issue. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with us, and just kind of talking about hospital work in general. It's definitely something that we don't hear much about, and in particular in relationship to passive house. So thank you.
Yes, I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, I liked our talk also very much, and maybe we meet again and talk about other aspects concerning hospital design. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Yeah, you're very welcome.
Great interview there. Thank you again, Ilka and Mary, for organising that. Let's go to you first, Ilka. What were your sort of main takeouts from your chat?
So my main takeout was that we were so excited about this first passive house hospital ever, and realized that talking to Petra that it actually for her wasn't as much difference in terms of process as we thought it would be, because for her, in general, building to pass to hospital standards is just such a high level of everything that Passive House was just one thing added to it and didn't really change a lot of the things that they were already doing.
And what about yourself, Mary?
Yes, it's gives me a better idea of what it's like to design and build in a context where airtightness testing is a given, and Passive House levels of construction are not surprising to any of the members concerned, because Petra talked about how the builder, the contract with the builder just included the Passive House targets, and it didn't seem like it was a big deal at all.
No big deal. Yeah. Because just the context around that, Ilka, is Frankfurt. What are the requirements there regarding Passive House or near Passive House?
Yeah, so for all new public buildings, they mandate the Passive House standard. So so far as I know, mostly schools have been built towards Passive House standard. And now that this hospital came along, I think it was a great opportunity. I mean, for me, it seems very daunting, but I think in this context, it was just a very big opportunity for the Passive House Institute to really kind of dig into this and basically set up a standard for hospitals, because that wasn't there before. And it was easy to do this because it was mandated already by the city of Frankfurt to build that way.
So what does that actually mean? Because we think of the Passive House being fairly well defined, but if there needs to be something created to allow for a particular type of building, what needs to be considered?
Well, I think for the hospital in particular, it was really looking at the primary energy demand. I think it was less about really, I mean, what we always think about when we hear Passive House is like high insulation levels and airtightness, and I think that wasn't as big of a concern. It was more about really investigating all these extra energy usage of medical devices that are usually not really included into any of the Passive House standards so far. So just by really doing research and looking at the like how everything's being used, the hours of usage, and just digging into these different devices, and that makes a huge difference in the overall energy reduction.
Yeah, it's quite a unique profile and a relatively complex building. What do you think, Zach?
Oh, well, it was amazing. I think that the fact that they saved 30% of energy compared to, a comparable conventional hospital is pretty astounding, given the fact that half of the primary energy was going to those devices that Ilka just mentioned. So that means that, the Passive House elements that are, focused on the envelope and a lot of thermal energy, overperformed, or not overperformed, but obviously were fairly transformational in the performance of the hospital to hit that 30% number. So I think that
for a 3%.
Right, 3% cost premium, right?
Which Petra seemed fairly this is 30%. She kind of dropped it in there, and that's pretty massive. A huge savings in operational costs of a building of that size. I imagine that's quite a sum.
Yeah, no kidding. The payback period is probably pretty quick.
Yeah. Anything else that stood out for you?
Well, I think that it's that understanding how health and Passive House and health and conventional hospitals, like how all that comes together, is, I think, really, and it raises interesting questions. We're like, what is the ventilation rate, appropriate ventilation rate for a hospital, and how does that compare to what we expect from Passive House? And what does that mean for energy and for health, and so I understand there's a pretty major report. It's unfortunately in German. But unfortunate for me since I don't read German.
Ilka can translate it for us.
Yeah, that goes into a lot of questions, and I've been really curious about them. I mean, I think that this time we've been going through with COVID, and our understanding of how important ventilation is. Has been really, I think, instructive with Passive House. I think there's a lot of ways that Passive House can buttress and support health. And there's also things that we're going to be learning as we come out of this pandemic. And I think there are probably some interesting lessons as well in hospitals. So very, very interesting interview and questions raised.
Yeah, Mary, what was your thoughts just on the way Petra worked and the company that she runs? Just any thoughts on
well,
I guess her experience?
Clearly, she's been very deeply steeped in hospital design and how to create conditions for the patients and for the nurses and doctors to have a comfortable environment and to work efficiently. And these were clearly the questions that she gets excited about. But also going back to Zach's point about, the airborne transmission of COVID and how using heat recovery ventilation systems in the hospital has got to be key to saving quite a bit of energy because, providing adequate ventilation is something that all hospital design has to deal with to maintain, Petra touched on it briefly, but to maintain healthy breathing conditions within each hospital room is critical. And to provide that level of ventilation, if you weren't using heat recovery or energy recovery, is a lot of energy loss. And I think it's something that many countries are having to deal with as they look at their health infrastructure in regards to COVID. And from what I understand from the Passive House Institute, there's been a lot of interest around the world in this hospital study. And
and I guess the mechanical systems of that, some people would get quite excited and very into the detail of how to conserve the energy or how to spread around say if there's excess energy for some of that equipment, using that, but keeping the air very, very separate, as you'd have to do in certain parts of the hospital. You don't want to be mixing air from one place, to another because you've got to reduce the risk of contamination and spread of illness or disease, that sort of thing. So Passive House has the ability to do that, but I imagine that there's some design complexity to make sure that all works well.
Yeah, Petra actually mentioned that there's no need for a heating system at all in the hospital, and that they all of a sudden, by reducing the size of the system, they had a lot more space to work with that typically gets taken up by mechanical rooms.
Yeah, and no doubt there will be more discussion about some of those. And I also find it, stepping back right at the beginning, just highlighting the fact that Petra's practice specializes in the design of hospitals, which is quite amazing that there's a niche that's there's a demand for a company that does just that. But I can see that there would be a need for that because there are so many complexities, and it is a special case of building types. She mentioned they do other work as well, but there's quite a lot to do design wise for something like a hospital.
And I would think that was very, very important for the Passive House Institute, because the Passive House Institute, they're not specialized in hospitals, right? So I'm sure that there was quite a bit of education from Petra and her team in terms of how a hospital works in general.
Yeah. Very good. Hey, well, once again, thank you, Ilka. That it's great to have that. I'm sure that this project will get discussed more and more, but it's great to get the inside word on that. Any final comments from anyone?
Well, I just love that her children who are adults now. Her adult children chose not to follow her into architecture because.
Yeah. Run away from architecture. Run away.
Because she worked too hard. And yet the professions they chose were not exactly easy either.
Yeah, no kidding.
No.
And they actually spent their time in buildings that she designed.
That's right. Cool.
She's still looking after them in a very physical sense. All right. Wonderful stuff. That's very inspiring. Hopefully that inspires people, and I'm sure it will inspire more health buildings to be created around the world. I think there's a really exciting scope for learning from this, but also being inspired and translating this type of thing to other jurisdictions, other climates, and other institutions around the world. Zach, what have we got coming up on the calendar?
Yeah, well, there are some exciting things coming up in North America, and it's accessible around the world. So the North American Passive House Network is having its annual conference. It's a hybrid conference called Passive House for All. And when I say hybrid, meaning it's both virtual and in person. And it's taking place on June 10th and 11th. And the in-person piece will be in New York City, and the virtual piece will be around the world. So please check. We'll have information in the show notes about that conference, and you can check that out. Theus's conference will be in early fall, in Tarrytown, New York, and likely we'll have almost certainly we'll have a physical component to it as well. And they are accepting speaking proposals now. So we'll share information in show notes about that. On the Passive House Accelerator front, this week we have is basically Down Under week this week, because the Construction Tech Tuesday, which is Wednesday, Down Under will feature Daniel Kress of Smart Plus Academy, and he's going to be talking about cooling in Passive House. So it's awesome. A good segue from the conversation around cooling in hospitals that we just heard. And then on Wednesday, the Global Passive House Happy Hour will feature Talina Edwards, and she'll be presenting about her award-winning Owl Woods Passive House. So some great stuff on tap.
Both previous guests on the show.
Indeed.
Yeah, yes. That's exciting. So you go back and check out those interviews. And I think I saw in my inbox that Passive House Open Days is coming up. So it's probably still time to get organised for that, coming up later in June. International Passive House Open Days.
We'll share details about that. Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, but if you have a project that you think might be good for that would be good to show off, definitely have a look on wherever your local affiliate is, or the International Passive House website. It really is such an important occasion, because the best way to feel a passive house, well, the only way to feel one is to be in one. And otherwise, we're just competing with real estate brochures and looking at beautiful pictures. So, we need more passive houses, whatever type of building they are, to be opened up, and so that people can go in and actually feel what it is like to be in a healthy, comfortable building.
You're here.
All right. Well, that just about does it for this week. Thanks again, Mary and Ilka. Great to have you back on the show for our regular catch up, and we'll be back again next week for another episode of Passive House Podcast.